If we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia.
The reason I'm having to stand here today is because there are people in positions of authority and respect who have said their votes didn't count, and it's not true.
They are shredding ballots, in my opinion, based on what I've heard.
There is no shredding of ballots going on. That's not real. It's not happening.
Brad, why did they put the votes in 3 times? You know, they put them in 3 times.
There was no problem with the machine scanning. If somebody took a stack of ballots and scanned them multiple times, you would have a lot of votes with no corresponding ballots.
It was stuffed with votes. They weren't in an official voter box. They were in what looked to be suitcases or trunks, suitcases, but they weren't in voter boxes.
There is videotape of this, and this is what's really frustrating. The president's legal team had the entire tape. They watched the entire tape, and then, from our point of view, intentionally misled the state Senate, voters, and the people of the United States about this. When I listened to the audio of the phone call, and the president brought that up again, and I heard it on a radio ad again today, I wanted to scream. But
have they moved? Have they moved the inner parts of the machines and replaced them with other parts?
No.
You sure, Ryan?
I'm sure, Mr. President.
Let's see. This is what I don't fully understand. No one is changing parts or pieces out of Dominion voting machines. That's not a real, I don't even know what that means.
Right. Top Georgia election official Gabriel Sterling with that reality check yesterday for President Trump. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Tuesday, January 5th. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, former U.S. Senator, now on NBC News and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill, and co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim Vandehei. It was painful to watch, but had to be done by these Georgia election officials, Joe. Republicans who seem to be able to stand up to Trump in a way that many others have not, to his face and to the cameras.
Well, the thing is, they're Republicans, lifelong Republicans. They support Donald Trump. They've supported Donald Trump, and they've been elected as.
But they also support facts.
As officials, Donald Trump. And we are actually starting to see a split finally in the Republican Party between those who are willing to actually work to engage in the president's attempt at sedition against the United States of America and undermining American democracy. And those Republicans, some in the Senate who would go up to the line but pulled back at the last second, decided that maybe, just maybe, sedition and treason against the United States may not be a good way to finish out the term. But Willie, the president's claims are beyond outrageous. He's picked them up from the sewers of the internet, and he passes them off as fact when Josh Hawley knows that they're lies. Ted Cruz knows that they're lies. Ron Johnson, to be honest with you, Ron Johnson sometimes doesn't know the difference between a microwave and a blender and his lawnmower. So I don't think we even need to go into Ron Johnson. He gets confused easily. But most of those people know, all of them know, Donald Trump is lying. Donald Trump knows he's lying.
They're lying.
And yet they are going to conduct a vote tomorrow where they're going to commit treason against the United States of America, sedition against the United States of America, trying to hold up and some overturn the popular will of how many people voted? 150 million Americans?
A little more than that.
It's like nothing, obviously, that we've ever seen in this country since the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, those were the faces right there, and it will happen tomorrow, the day after this Georgia Senate election.
Could we put those faces up again, by the way? Could we put those faces up again? Because these are the people who are voting to help the president's attempt to commit treason against the United States of America. Take a good long look at them. I'm sorry, Willie, go ahead.
No, and last night, President Trump, in his appearance in Georgia on the eve of this election that will determine control of the United States Senate, is recruiting publicly Mike Pence, his own vice president, saying, We hope he comes through on Wednesday. Now, Mike Pence has only a ceremonial role when this Electoral College vote takes place officially in the United States Senate and in the Congress on Wednesday. But Donald Trump is recruiting him and asking him to do something more. He views him as a judge at a trial, which is not how this works at all. But now you have those senators, the president of the United States and the vice president, all working together on this effort. It will fail. We know that because we know how this system works, but they are going out in a failed attempt, and they know it's going to fail. They are sticking their necks out to participate in what you describe as sedition, and it's hard to describe it any other way. You had
to appease a crazy man.
To appease the president, who, as you just said, Joe, he is plucking those theories. We're going to hear more from our reporter Ben Collins in a minute from QAnon. And as he describes them, it's clear he doesn't even quite understand them. He's throwing terms out and theories out. And very patiently, the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, and his attorney on that call are just saying, no, Mr. President, no, sir, that didn't happen. You could see the frustration from Gabe Sterling, the elections official that we heard from coming into the show, point by point, refuting this in a state where the vote, Joe, has been counted 3 times. 3 times in the state of Georgia, the vote has been counted. And President Trump at his rally last night asking people to go vote for 2 Republicans in a place where he claims the vote was rigged previously. Wild.
And he also claims, or at least one of his lawyers claimed, that Kelly Loeffler was part of a conspiracy theory to rig the runoffs, to keep Doug Collins out. And the president even hinted at that in a tweet earlier. But Claire McCaskill, I'm just wondering, I don't think been in public life since 1993 when I first started campaigning. I don't think in, God, all that time, I don't think I've ever, over a quarter of a century, ever said a politician was guilty of sedition or treason. I know that conservatives have always done that. I don't think I'm one of them. There's a big 1960s book that that conspiracy theorists on the right love called "None Dare Call It Treason." I'm just curious. You're an attorney. You're a prosecutor, former prosecutor. You're a senator. Is it too harsh to accuse the president of the United States and those who are conspiring with him right now of committing sedition against the United States of America, or committing treason against the United States of America? Because you look at the federal statute. I mean, look at Michelle Goldberg. She starts her column with a federal statute this morning, and just look at the federal statute. It sure looks like this president is guilty of something, and it sure seems like sedition to me.
I think, Joe, that we are so worn down by the behavior of this guy and his lies. I mean, think what he has done. He started lying early and often, and his supporters looked the other way and became numb to it. And frankly, all of us became somewhat numb to how often and how robust his lies were. So he's taken that strategy and he's applied it to this election. He started lying about the security of this election months ago. So now, because some of his followers believe these lies, that is the little flimsy excuse, which I believe is seditious, for these elected senators to ignore the Constitution. And you went through the list. I will tell you, not only do the majority of these senators know better, not only do they know that this is a total stunt on his part, the other thing that's interesting about it to me is the schism this is causing within the Republican Party in the Senate. I've talked to a lot of senators over the last week, and I'll just tell you what is really interesting is senior senators from a lot of these guys' states are voting in favor of the Constitution. They're going to perform their ministerial duty. They know they have no power to overturn the states. They know that what these guys are doing is not conservative. It's radical. It's extreme. It's anything but being a constitutional conservative. So you see splits within delegations for the majority of these states. And that is really unusual because usually 2 Republican senators from a state kind of talk to each other and go the same way, especially if the senior senator is explaining that this is a dumb move. They're ignoring that advice from senior senators in these states.
And you know, Mika, I've been describing for 4 years, actually for 5 years, during the campaign, I said Donald Trump is no conservative.
Right.
Not even close.
Democrat.
And I've been describing for the past 4 years how these Republicans are not conservative, how they are trashing constitutional norms, how they remain quiet while the president claims ultimate power under Article 2 of the Constitution. They remain quiet while the president racks up the biggest deficits, the biggest federal debt of all time, spends like a drunken socialist, out of control. Nothing conservative about this guy. And now, in one of their final acts as members of the United States Senate, you're going to have self-proclaimed conservatives who, again, aren't conservative, they're radical. They're going to actually vote to have the federal government, to have the centralized state sweep in and override the decision of voters, override local and state election officials, to do actually just the opposite of what we conservatives have always said we're for, which is deferring, having the federal government do what the federal government has to do, but deferring to the state, especially where the Constitution suggests that we defer to the states. And elections are to be handled by state legislatures. And then we have the states certify the process. And then it goes to Washington. You have Josh Hawley. Oh, no, it doesn't matter what the state legislators say. It doesn't matter what the local election officials say. It doesn't matter what the voters say. We in the centralized state are going to override the wisdom of their vote, the wisdom of the state legislators, the wisdom of the state election officials, and yes, the wisdom of our founders who said elections were to be regulated on the state level. But Josh Hawley is now going to sweep in and say, screw the Constitution, screw the state legislators, screw the voters. We in the centralized state are going to determine what the law is. We're going to determine what the law is because one person who's in the White House is telling us to do this. It is the most anti-democratic thing any of us have seen since the Civil War. And Josh Hawley, you're in the middle of it. Ted Cruz, you're in the middle of it. And all those other idiots are in the middle of it, a lot of idiots with Ivy League degrees, by the way.
I don't get
a lot of
thinking.
idiots with Ivy League degrees. I don't know if they can strip them of their degrees or not. I'm just a state school guy, but I can read the black and white lettering of the United States Constitution and know these people are useful idiots for a tyrant in training.
And you can see a crime when it's being committed.
Yeah, exactly.
By the person that you're doing this for.
Well, they can too. They can.
That's where I don't understand the thinking.
They went to Harvard and Yale Law School. They can read the Constitution. They know what they're doing.
Well, as we've mentioned, while the president's rally in Georgia last night was intended to support the Senate candidates, he spent much of his time railing against his own failed bid for re-election. At one point, the president put the pressure on Vice President Mike Pence, zeroing in on the role that Pence will play overseeing tomorrow's certification of the Electoral College vote count.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
Tomorrow, Pence will preside over the proceedings as Congress votes on the Electoral College results. It's a role that is largely ceremonial. Pence does not have unilateral power to affect the outcome of those proceedings, but Trump, as you can see, is pressuring him to do some dramatic act going against
Donald Trump doesn't understand the Constitution. He doesn't want to understand.
Well, he also thinks the people around him are that stupid, and many are. Many are that stupid. They do what they think that he says they should do instead of what is right. So why not push the envelope is what Trump is thinking. And the people around him are the bigger idiots because they know better. As the New York Times puts it, Pence's role will be more akin to the presenter opening the Academy Award envelope or reading the name of the movie that won Best Picture with no say in determining the winner. It may be worth noting that on the campaign trail in Georgia yesterday, Pence did not engage when the crowd began chanting, "Stop the steal." Peter Baker, you're following all of this. What are the chances Mike Pence would do something that crazy for Donald Trump? My gut is no.
Well, it's hard to say. I don't know what he could do. I mean, I honestly don't know what they see as the genuine options. The Department of Justice has already said that, this Louis Gohmert lawsuit trying to preemptively order Pence in effect to take action was out of bounds. He doesn't really have a role. His role is to open up the box, hand the piece of paper to the senators who will be the tellers, who will read the results out loud. And that's it. And then, Josh Hawley and the Republicans in the House can object. And if they get one member of the Senate and one member of the House to object to a state's electors, then they'll go their separate ways in their separate chambers and have 2 hours of debate, and they'll vote. And these votes are predetermined. We know what these votes are going to be. Obviously, the Democratic House is not going to agree to unseat electors for Joe Biden. Obviously, we've now seen more than enough Republican senators say they wouldn't vote to do that either, that we know there's a majority in the Senate as well. So we're going to go through a kabuki dance tomorrow, but one that obviously has great import because it's the first time I think we've ever seen in our history a sitting president of the United States lose an election and yet try to hang on to power even after the Electoral College has voted through, a series of false claims and, increasingly desperate efforts to pressure anybody in the system to allow him to stay in office despite the will of the people.
Jim VandeHei, this appears to be the extreme extension of the old doctrine that the president put out years ago that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and everybody would stay with him. Now he's trying to overturn a presidential election. He's trying to subvert democracy and push and push and push and say, how far will these people go with me? Well, he's got a group of United States senators and perhaps the vice president of the United States and tens of millions of his supporters who've said, sure, I'll go along for the ride.
Yeah, I mean, Peter has a great piece in the New York Times today looking at sort of the historical anomaly. This has never happened before, and people need to realize that. Then you have to ask, well, why is it that when you get to the vote that Peter just laid out, why is it that probably more than half in total of elected Republicans are going to vote to overturn the election or try to overturn the election? It's not just Trump. When you get outside of Washington, almost every voter you talk to, Republican voter, is with Donald Trump, probably because of Donald Trump. They firmly seem to believe, based on the reporting, based on talking to them, based on the inbox in terms of like people who are emailing on a daily basis, they seem to really believe it. And there's nothing you can write, nothing you can say that seems to change their mind. Joe pointed out earlier, this isn't a bunch of woke lefties that are doing this to Donald Trump. These are some of the Trumpiest Trumps out there. Tom Cotton, you're trying to tell me that he's not a Trump guy? Until yesterday, you would have said he's one of the most Trumpy Republicans out there. The governor of Georgia, handpicked by Donald Trump. If we were having this debate 2 weeks ago, you would have said he's in the top 5 Republicans who are closest to Donald Trump and most like Donald Trump. So it's not just the media. It's not just the lefties. It is all these Republicans who are close to him, and yet it doesn't seem to be moving the needle with his supporters, which is why these 2024 Republicans are making the calculation that this will work in their advantage.
Yeah, and let's expand on that for a second. So if this is a deep state conspiracy, my God, it's deep. How deep is your love? How deep is this deep state conspiracy? Bill Barr's in this deep state conspiracy. Amy Coney Barrett, she's in the deep state conspiracy too, if you believe this nonsense. Tom Cotton, also in the deep state conspiracy, if you believe this nonsense. Every federal judge Trump appointed that and Mitch McConnell Senate approved. The reason why you gave up your religion, the reason why you gave up your values, the reason why you put your evangelical faith in a blind trust over the past 4 years in exchange for 30 pieces of silver and some federal judges. I hope you're spending the 30 pieces of silver, because those federal judges that you actually lost your religion for, that you sacrificed your faith for, they're all in the deep state conspiracy too. Because they're all voting against Donald Trump's attempt to overturn an election. So, are you really that stupid? I don't think you're that stupid. I really don't think you. I think you maybe you go on Facebook and maybe you go on other pages because it makes you feel good. It reinforces what you believe. But you know deep in your heart that he's wrong. You know deep in your heart he's a liar. You know deep in your heart he's not conservative. He's a cancer on the conservative movement. He's a cancer on the Republican Party. He's tearing it to shreds right now. I warned you. 5 years. It's happening. He's tearing the Republican Party apart. You think I'm happy about that? You think I want the left wing of the Democratic Party to take over Washington, D.C.? Well, if you do, you're a fool. You're an idiot, and you haven't listened to anything I've been telling you for the past 5 years. Because we've gotten to the place where conservatives and the never-Trumpers and I have warned you we were going to get to. And now look what's happening. But you're still believing Donald Trump. You're still believing a guy who contributed to Hillary Clinton 9 times. You're still believing a guy who contributed to Kamala Harris in 2014. You're still believing a guy who gave one check after another to Charlie Rangel. You're still believing a guy who gave political contributions to Anthony Weiner. You're still believing a guy that gave political contributions to Eliot Spitzer. Really? That's your definition of conservative, and that's why you were willing to lose your religion for Donald Trump? That's why you were willing to sell out conservatism for Donald Trump? That's why you were willing to watch the Republican Party destroy itself for Donald Trump? Wake up. It's almost midnight, Cinderella. And things are about to get ugly if you don't pull away from this failed reality TV host. Peter Baker, we get numbed by what we see day in and day out over the past 4 or 5 years. Your article does talk about how extraordinary this moment in time is. Could you explain to our viewers just what a break from history this is and how this has never happened before, that we haven't seen a split like this since the Civil War in 1861?
Yeah, I think it is important to pull back every once in a while. I think because we have gotten, as you say, so, numb to the mishigas that comes with this presidency over the last 4 years, we've sort of lost touch of just how unusual it really is, right? So 220 years ago in 1800, John Adams, the second president of the United States, loses to Thomas Jefferson, and he turns over power. And in doing so, creates the precedent for a bedrock principle of American democracy that has held ever since. And we've never seen since then a sitting president, not one time a sitting president who lost the election try to do what Donald Trump is doing. Now, we've had disputed elections, certainly. 1876 is usually thought of as the worst one. There was, of course, a fight over the 2000 election. Neither of those and the other ones that were argued about involved a sitting president trying to use the power of his office to somehow subvert the will of the voters, right? What you heard the president do with Brad Raffensperger wasn't just say, hey, I want an honest election. What he said is, I want you to find me the votes so that I win. And he said, he even dangled the idea that there might be a criminal exposure for a Republican official in Georgia if he didn't follow suit. He used the word criminal 9-10 times in the course of that hour-long conversation. Now, I don't know whether that's illegal or not. That's for lawyers to describe, but it certainly sounds like an extraordinary application of pressure by the person who has already shown that he's willing to use the Justice Department to serve his political interests. And I think that, We don't see that in American history. This is so different and so out of the norm that it's worth stopping every once in a while to say, wait a second, this is not how America has worked, at least not in our lifetime.
No, and if you know President Trump's patterns and also his obsession with big reveals on his reality shows and whatever else he's done in the past, pageants, whatever. Willie, I'm sorry, it is, in my opinion, very possible, knowing the nature of his personality, that he actually thinks Mike Pence would do some reveal when he opens the envelope or passes it along that proclaims him the president of the United States. And that's what he's counting on from Mike Pence. And so I asked Peter Baker, who so innocently is trying to stick to things that are normal, like the Constitution and history and everything this country has been built on and every process that we have stuck to ever since. The president's working outside the norms. And I'm telling you, the guy thinks Mike Pence is going to have like a special secret envelope with his name in it. He's delusional.
I don't think there's any question about that. He's been saying that privately, pushing Mike Pence, according to reporting in the New York Times, saying, figure something out, do something. And then last night, he threw it out into the open at that rally in Georgia and said, Mike Pence better come through for us or else I'm not going to like him so much. Let's go to Georgia. The Secretary of State there, that phone call that we were just discussing in which President Trump urged the Secretary of State to, quote, find votes. During the call, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger tried to warn the president not to rely on internet conspiracies.
Mr. President, the problem you have with social media, people can say anything.
No, this isn't social media. This is Trump media. It's not social media. It's really not. It's not social media. I don't care about social media.
Let's bring in NBC News reporter Ben Collins. Ben, good morning. It's good to see you. So you cover this stuff. You cover QAnon. You find yourself in the darkest corners of the internet. That's how you make your living. What did you think as you listened to the more than 1 hour phone call between President Trump and Brad Raffensperger as President Trump sort of stumbled his way through these basic QAnon conspiracy theories?
You know, I was startled by his knowledge and grasp of really specific conspiracy theories that didn't even make it out of the QAnon internet. They didn't make it to the civilian internet where most people live. They barely made it to Facebook rumor level stuff. For example, the president targets this woman named Ruby Freeman, who is an election worker. She's a black woman. And 4chan specifically, which is an extremist website, by the way, specifically said this woman was rigging the election using suitcases. This is an elaborate conspiracy theory. And the president specifically targeted this one hashtag called Where's Ruby. If you do the analytics on this hashtag, this was an exclusively QAnon hashtag. Only a few hundred people retweeted this thing, and it was pretty much all QAnon accounts. Who is Ruby Freeman really? She's a woman who sells purses on Instagram and has a kiosk at the mall. She is not this elaborate scammer, which is what the president called her. And it's almost like confounding that this person has this information coming to him through this pipeline. QAnon was built on the idea that, the Democratic Party is run by Satanists, child eaters, and all this nonsense. That fell apart because there were several deadlines that were passed. It's like a cult where they have hard deadlines of, the rapture, and it comes and goes. So what happened instead? That network of people on Twitter and Facebook and in blogs, they have spent the last 2 months finding these ridiculous ways the president can remain in office despite losing the election.
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle.
I'm Chuck Rosenberg. On my podcast, The Oath, I talk with people who served with integrity and honor, men and women who light the way. This week, former head of the Guantanamo Review Task Force, Matt Olson.
The initial idea of Guantanamo was ill-conceived, that there could be sort of a legal black hole where we could hold detainees. And it remains a problem in our history, I think, from a counterterrorism perspective.
Join me for Season 4 of The Oath, an MSNBC podcast. Search for The Oath wherever you're listening right now and subscribe. New episodes every Wednesday.
So, Ben, you mentioned a pipeline from QAnon, from these cesspools of the internet to the president of the United States. How are they making their way to the president? How are they making their way to the Oval Office that he can become so fluent in them?
Yeah, it's mostly just those QAnon network factions on Twitter. You know, they kind of come together. They build up these big retweets. And by the way, Mika was right. She said this thing about how she's expecting this big reveal. You know, the president that wants this big reveal to happen. There was a hashtag in QAnon Twitter called the Pence card. They think there's going to be a literal, card that he can play where Mike Pence goes up there on Wednesday and says, hey, guess what? Donald Trump is still the president of the United States. This is just bonkers stuff from the very fringe corners of the internet. And they work together to push these things up. Mostly it comes through this guy named Ron Watkins. Ron Watkins runs the website 8kun. It used to be called 8chan. That's the website last year where all those white nationalists were posting the manifestos before they went and killed people. They had to rebrand. Ron Watkins has since turned into some sort of election expert. He's on OAN saying he knows all these things about voting machines. He has no experience in voting machines. The president retweets this guy constantly, retweets his segments constantly. He might be Q from QAnon. He runs the website that QAnon posts on, right? So that's where all of this is coming from. This is raw QAnon, just sort of they're shifting their talking points from the Democratic cabal, and they're changing it to be about the president remaining in office.
It's amazing, Claire McCaskill, isn't it, that this stuff that you probably used to see in emails and strange letters your office might get has now risen to the Oval Office.
Yeah, in fact, I remember laughing about Comet Pizza when it first came out and how funny it was. Well, it's not funny anymore. And Ben, I'm curious, you have the, I think, odious task of prowling around these sites and learning about these people. A two-part question. One, what are you seeing about what they're planning on the ground Wednesday, tomorrow in D.C.? And secondly, what is your sense about infiltration by foreign agents that see this as an incredible leverage to make us look silly on the world stage and to tear apart our democracy from the inside?
Sure, I'll answer your second one first. QAnon is a very American phenomenon. If it wasn't started by an American, it would be a shock to most people. That doesn't mean foreign actors aren't using it to push their narratives and split people apart. It's sort of the perfect fodder for a foreign influence campaign. And, we've seen from Facebook reports and Twitter reports who have taken down foreign influence campaigns that they've used QAnon hashtags constantly because it's a good network of people to get riled up. You want to get people who are already sort of near the fringe and push them over the edge. That's the point of foreign influence campaigns. Now, speaking of pushing people over the edge, Wednesday, that's the scary thing that we're all worried about. How many of these people are being driven to real life action from what they're reading on Facebook and Twitter and from what the president is putting out into those parts of the internet? I think we're going to find out. This is something they've been planning on this for about a month, and lots of different militias and even Facebook groups are coming together and saying, let's all come together to show our support for the president. But a lot of them are saying, let's come armed, let's come ready. That's the big fear here, is that it's not just going to be a bunch of Proud Boys prowling the streets. It's going to be a bunch of Proud Boys who are intermingled with random fans of the president and people who are coming out to counter-protest. And that's how you get trouble, was when you get a cocktail of people who all believe that something is amiss and they can't do anything about it. That's where the worry is. What's the next step for those people when their savior doesn't remain in office anymore?
Yeah, and the president, as you say, is encouraging them to come to Washington on Wednesday. God knows what happens from there. NBC's Ben Collins, whose reporting has been indispensable on all of this stuff. You can read it at NBCnews.com. Ben, thanks so much. Mika?
Well, by the way, yesterday in our coverage of some of the Republicans' plans to object to the Electoral College votes, we pointed out some context and history that the last 3 times a Republican has been elected president, Democrats in the House brought objections to the electoral votes in states the Republican nominee won. We gave several examples of congressional Democrats who praised then-Senator Barbara Boxer, who in 2005 objected to President George W. Bush's electoral votes from Ohio. We noted that Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, then a House member, issued a press release praising Boxer's efforts. We should clarify, though, that while Van Hollen commended Boxer for for raising the issue. He also made clear at the time that, quote, I think it would have been irresponsible to use the certification process to attempt to change that result. Doing so would establish a terrible precedent. In future elections, a majority party in Congress could attempt to overturn the election of a president of the other party. Van Hollen voted against the motion to overturn the election results from Ohio. And still ahead on Morning Joe, it's Election Day in Georgia, and that means it's going to be a busy one for Steve Kornacki. He joins the conversation next. Plus, House Majority Whip and co-chair of the President-elect Joe Biden's inaugural committee, Jim Clyburn, will be our guest. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
We have won this election in Georgia based on all of this. The people of Georgia are angry.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
Do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Do you know anything about that?
No.
You sure, Brian?
I'm sure.
You know what they did, and you're not reporting it. Under law, you're not allowed to give faulty election results. You're not allowed to do that, and that's what you've done. You know, the people of Georgia know that this was a scam, and a lot of Republicans are going to vote negative because they hate what you did to the president.
Oh, my God. Just too real. Joining us now, national political correspondent and for NBC News and MSNBC and author of The Red and the Blue, Steve Kornacki joins us this morning.
Steve, thanks so much. It's great to see you again, and congratulations on your gig at NBC Sports. It's absolutely incredible. I wanted to ask you, I've been hearing a little bit about early voting and Republicans not getting the numbers they need from rural areas before Election Day. Of course, though, those numbers are usually low, are they not? And we would expect more day of voting for the Republicans.
Yeah, and that's what this is coming down to, Joe, and thank you. It's great to be back here for a big election day. And yeah, it is. It's a story you've heard in 2020, in 2018, in 2016. We've seen this in the early voting period here in Georgia, where Democrats have liked the numbers they've seen. They've liked some of the demographic indicators they're getting. And what this is coming down to is just a question of what is the turnout going to look like today? How many people are going to show up? How Republican? We know it's going to be we are almost certain it's going to be a more Republican electorate today than a Democratic electorate, but how much more Republican than Democratic? But we've certainly seen this set up before in a number of different races in a number of different states where the early voting looks encouraging for Democrats, and then the opportunity is there for Republicans on Election Day to make it all up and more. We have certainly seen them do that before. Doesn't mean that will happen today, but we've seen the setup before, certainly.
So, Steve, let's, and this is something I want to do when we all can take a deep breath after we are sure the Constitution is spared from Donald Trump. But I want to go through a series after January 20th of segments just called, What Happened? Like, for instance, I'd love to know what exactly happened in the state of Florida. What happened in other close states? Why did Susan Collins win by 9 in Maine and Joe Biden win by 9? Those sort of things. But we have you here, and we're talking about the state of Georgia. So why don't we start our little What Happened segment with you telling us on Election Day, what happened in Georgia? Did we have more black voters come out in 2020 that came out in 2016? Did that make the difference? Or was it white voters and other voters in the suburbs of Atlanta that probably made the difference in Joe Biden's win, if you look at the margins between 16 and 20?
Yeah, I think a big thing you saw, and what you see here is the Biden-Trump margin there in Georgia. A big thing you saw was turnout was just up everywhere. You did 5 million people basically voting in Georgia in the presidential election. But I think the biggest swings toward Democrats, the biggest single thing that changed this from 2016, where Trump wins the state by 5 points, to 2020, where Biden ekes it out, is just movement in those suburbs. Now, and I take it a step further because I think it's directly relevant to what we're seeing today. The movement that I'm talking about that put Joe Biden over the top in Georgia was not quite there for the Democrats in the Senate races. There were split ticket voters in Georgia on Election Day. So take a look at this. Here's the Biden-Trump result. Again, 12,000 votes, basically. That's the margin for Biden over Trump in Georgia. Now take a look at Perdue versus Ossoff. The other race, the other Senate race was that jungle primary, a bunch of different candidates. But you basically had a one-on-one with Perdue and Ossoff. So from Biden winning the state by 12,000, you've got in the Senate race Perdue finishing ahead of Ossoff. 88,000 vote margin there. So plus 88,000 for the Republicans in this Senate race, minus 12,000 for the Republicans in the presidential race, a difference there in margin of 100,000 votes. And then you start asking yourself, okay, where did that come from? Where were these split ticket voters? Who are these split ticket voters? And that's where I think an interesting demographic profile starts to emerge. I'll give you a couple examples. The biggest single example of this is in the biggest county in the state, Fulton County, which is Atlanta. It's also, there are suburbs in Fulton County, too. So core Democratic area. Take a look at the difference, though. Jon Ossoff in the Senate race gets just under 70% of the vote in Fulton County. His margin, 216,000 votes. That's good. But now take a look what Biden got out of the same county.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? I'll be talking with writer Wright Thompson about nostalgia, memory, the South, and bourbon.
One of the things that really blew my mind doing this book is finding out that Kentucky, for instance, was in the Union. You know, of course, bourbon, which is the most nostalgic and mythologized of all drinks, of course, bourbon is made in a place that now pretends it lost a war it actually won. So, like, when you're looking at the South, you do need to understand the power and seductiveness of mythology and always be aware of the fact that if you aren't looking out for it, it will get you.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
73% almost, and a margin of 242,000 votes. Remember, we're trying to account for that difference right there. This is a more than 25,000 vote difference in the margin from the Senate race to the presidential race. Biden doing better than Ossoff. So then you break it down further. Okay, we're in Fulton County. Where in Fulton County did you see these disparities the most? And the answer is you tend to find them Roswell, Sandy Springs, Buckhead. You tend to find them in the higher income, college educated, more sort of suburban areas of Fulton County. And so I think a profile starts to emerge of the split ticket voter on Election Day who was anti-Trump, who wanted to go out and vote Trump out of office, but also did not want to vote for Democrats. And so voted for Biden and then voted Republican. It's not a huge number, but it's the difference between Biden winning by 12,000 and Perdue having 88,000 more votes than Ossoff, at least in the preliminary.
Well, you know, and Willie, when we first started talking about these two races, I was certain the Republicans were going to win both of the races. But you've seen the madness, the Donald Trump madness. A lot of conservatives are now saying if the Republicans lose even one of these seats today, it'll be on the shoulders of Donald Trump for the madness that he's been stirring. And so we've just heard from Steve, the very voters who couldn't handle the craziness of Donald Trump, but didn't want Bernie Sanders to be chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, voted Republican. I'm wondering what happens today with the voting because of the craziness, because of the lunacy, because Kelly Loeffler came out yesterday and said, hey, you know what? I'm going to get on the sedition train as well. It does put a question mark over tonight's races.
Yeah, it's interesting. She dodged that question for so long. And then on the eve of the election came out, Senator Loeffler did and said, yes, I'm on board with these senators who are going to challenge and raise an objection to the Electoral College. So she, as you said, is now on board there, too. Steve, the polls open about 13 minutes from right now. They'll close at 7 o'clock. Do you have a sense right now with those 3 million early and absentee votes, more than 3 million already in the bank, of how long it may be till we know a winner in these two races?
Yeah, I mean, I would say be prepared to be patient on this one, but there's the potential this could go quicker than it did in November. In November, remember, and I think this is important, we could put a couple numbers here on the screen for what happened in Georgia in November. Let me just reset there to the statewide. So look, at about 3 a.m., Wednesday morning, election night into early the next morning, at about 3 a.m. in November, 94% of all the votes in Georgia were counted up and accounted for. However, at that point, Trump still led in the count. And that's because the remaining 6% in November, the remaining 6%, which then took 4 or 5 days to process and count, was all mail-in votes. It was primarily in Fulton County, in the immediate Atlanta metro area. There were a few other places like Chatham County and Savannah. But that other 6%, it was just that cumbersome mail-in ballot processing that ended up taking 3 or 4 days. And again, that mail-in vote was overwhelmingly Democratic. It wasn't until 3 a.m. Friday morning that Joe Biden actually caught Trump in the tally in Georgia and then won the state. So, look, that's what happened in November. What's to say that that same timeline wouldn't play out this time? Be prepared to be patient. The optimistic version of this, though, is that was kind of the shakedown cruise for a lot of these folks dealing with mail balloting on a scale they had never seen before. Now they've done it once. They have a little better sense of what it takes. I've been talking to some of the election officials in Fulton County in particular. They certainly sound like they are on a much more rapid pace than they were back in November to get these done. So there's the possibility here this could be much quicker. But certainly if November's a guide, it could take some time.
Well, it's an exciting election ahead. The stakes for Senate race couldn't be higher. And Steve, we can't wait to see it guide us through it tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Claire McCaskill, wanted to ask you, as someone who knows the Senate very well in these elections, it's so hard to beat an incumbent unless there are extraordinary circumstances. So you certainly are aware of that. Do you think the circumstances of the last month are extraordinary enough to push one or two of the Democrats over the finish line tonight? Or are these races going to go according to plan?
I was fascinated with Steve's analysis there because if you are running these races, you are looking carefully at those split ticket voters. And here's my question, Joe. Does Donald Trump doing what he's doing in Georgia, doesn't that hurt the Republican candidates in terms of those crossover voters? Think of all those people that Steve just referenced that voted for Joe Biden and then voted for David Perdue. Well, what Trump has done has really, I think, discouraged them from going down this rat hole of voting, especially for Kelly Loeffler, who is like joined hands. She's now this QAnon woman's best friend. I mean, the president put the QAnon woman on the podium last night. Everybody in Georgia saw that. So in all of the insider trading that has come out with the two of them, I really think there is a chance that both of these Democrats prevail, especially if you look at some of the analysis of the early voting and who turned out that didn't vote in November. That's another thing I'd love Steve to take a crack at. Maybe tonight in our coverage he can, talking about the new voters that didn't even vote in November. Who are they and where are they from? And what does that say about what the vote might turn out to be tonight?
Right, that might be a real opportunity. Joining us now, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at The Grio, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson, and political scientist, editor of the website The Cycle, and senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, Rachel Bitecofer. She's out with a new piece entitled Democrats Head into Election Day with a Powerful Closing Message. The question is, will they use it? So I guess, Rachel, let's start with that. What is that message?
I mean, that's exactly right? We're talking about these very distinct small group of swing voters who split their tickets. And I can tell you specifically who they are. We're talking about independent voters, college-educated millennials predominantly, who grew up in these Republican households. And they're deeply uncomfortable with Donald Trump, right? So they walked into the ballot box in November and they voted for Joe Biden. But because they didn't get their Perdue and Loeffler tied tightly to Donald Trump, they felt comfortable enough to fill out that Republican ballot still. And, the question is, have the Ossoff and Warnock campaigns made a compelling case that Perdue and Loeffler are Trump? Or if they are equivocal to Donald Trump in those voters' minds, they're going to walk into the ballot booth this time and they're going to vote for the Democratic candidates, right? And I think that the conditions have certainly made that case, as you were just, wondering. I think Claire was, opining, gosh, these events of the last month have certainly made that case, but we are all super tuned in. So we know that. Average voters don't necessarily get that, message themselves. And it's the job of a campaign to make that case. So that's what my argument is showing. It's saying, look, we look at the early vote. We know exactly that they have the Stacey Abrams and the turnout operation has delivered for Democrats a necessary but not sufficient condition for them to win. They have turned out a very heavy in Black turnout, heavy in youth turnout base of operations for them to start Election Day off on. But they need to deliver some of these swing voters. Some of these voters that did not vote for Democrats in the fall will have to do so today for them to win.
So, Jason Johnson, then to you on why at this point it's so close. I mean, what does that say? Not just about messaging, but about the voters in Georgia and the impact that Trump has had.
Well, Mika, and Happy New Year, everybody. What I thought was going on in Georgia and what I've seen with my eyes and heard from people since I got here are very different. Part of why this state is so close is because it is still very purple. You still have a lot of conservative voters down here, Black, white, Asian, AAPI community, Latino community. I think one of the things that people sort of overlook about Georgia is it's not South Carolina. It's not just a black and white state. There are large swaths of other minority populations here who are voting. But I think the other part of why things are so close, it's not just because of these swing voters. It's because there are such different passionate feelings about the candidates on the ticket. For example, we hear this number that, over 100,000 people who didn't vote in November are voting now. Where are those people coming from? A large chunk of those people, they're young, they're Black, they're brown. These are young activist voters who didn't really like Joe Biden. They didn't think that Joe Biden was going to bring the kind of change they wanted, and they certainly weren't going to go out and vote for Donald Trump. They're out voting now because they see Jon Ossoff, because they see Raphael Warnock, and are like, oh, okay, this is some change I can get behind. The other interesting thing that I've heard down here is that for a long, long time, I was under the impression and reading the numbers that it's going to be a twofer, right? Either both the Republicans win or both the Democrats win. What I am hearing now on the ground from both Republicans and Democrats is they think there's a possibility there could be a split. This could end up being Perdue and Warnock who end up winning. And if this is a situation where both candidates win, it's going to be Raphael Warnock who brings Ossoff over the line, as opposed to the other way around. That is what I'm hearing from most people down here. They seem to think that Warnock has really galvanized a lot of African-American voters in very Black rural counties in the South that have usually been overlooked, who are excited about the possibility of putting a reverend in office. This doesn't mean that Ossoff has done bad. It means that Kelly Loeffler is a lot more toxic to those suburban voters than Perdue is.
And of course, Democrats need to win both if they want to control the Senate. A split gives Republicans a small majority there. So, Jason, for people you talk to on the ground covering this race since you've been there, there's this question of whether Donald Trump talking about how the election was rigged and stolen from him, something we've been refuting throughout this show and for the last several weeks, and so have Republican officials in the state of Georgia, by the way, for the last couple of days. They worry, Republicans do, that suppresses turnout, that people don't go out and vote in a system that they are told is rigged. And they also don't go out and vote in an election where Donald Trump is not at the top of the ballot. So what is your sense of the impact of Donald Trump's presence there in Georgia?
Willie, I'll give you the perfect quote. I was listening to local conservative radio down here. There was a guy who went on like a 20-minute rant saying, none of these four sociopaths will improve your life. If you listen to local conservative radio, they're disgusted with all of this. They have bought into a lot of Trump's conspiracy theories, that Brian Kemp is a tool of the Democrats and that the whole electoral process is garbage. I was surprised at how many local conservative radio hosts are basically suppressing their own vote. And I do think that Republicans are facing a challenge. Donald Trump isn't on the ballot. And if there's going to be a weird quirk that may happen, we don't know what the results are going to be. But Donald Trump not being on the ballot may suppress some votes because, hardcore MAGA supporters are like, well, our guy's not there. And Joe Biden not being on the ballot may actually bring out some Democratic voters who weren't particularly enthusiastic about him. So that's what I'm hearing down here. But it's amazing how difficult it is for the Republican Party to try to get out Republican voters. MAGA voters are going to come out. Trumpists are going to come out. But a lot of mainline Republican voters are so frustrated with what they've heard from Donald Trump and the attacks on the Secretary of State, who is no hero against voter suppression, by the way. But many, many mainline Republicans are like, a pox on both houses. I don't like Loeffler. I don't like the insider trading. I don't like Donald Trump. I might sit this one out.
Hi, it's MSNBC's Hayes Brown. These days there's just so much news to wrap your head around. It's challenging to get a deeper understanding of things. So every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. It features written perspectives from people you know and trust, including Trymaine Lee, Mehdi Hasan, Liz Plank, and Frank Figliuzzi. They'll take you inside the most important issues of our times. Issues like systemic racism, domestic terrorism, and how we can bridge our political divide. Plus, you'll get a fresh take every morning from me. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.